Hey there everyone, this is Samuel Johnson and welcome back to the Steven Universe Retrospectives, and today we're going to be discussing episodes 5 and 6 of Steven Universe Future, Bluebird, and a very special episode. And Bluebird begins with Steven, filming a commercial for a little homeschool, talking about all the good parts about it, how you can learn to basically channel your destructive energy to creating or plotting land, find your center now that you're not being commanded by the diamonds, yada yada, blah blah blah, basically just basic advertising stuff. However, as Steven wraps up filming with all the participants of the commercial, he ends up on the receiving end of several pranks in air quotes. I call them that because they're not really good pranks. For example, one prank has a note taped to his back that says, "Say I smell good," which Peridot does. He takes a drink from what he thinks is a juice box. In reality, it's portable tomato soup. And the final thing is that his car gets TP'd by someone just neatly stacking rolls of toilet paper on top of it. Also, something I should probably mention now because I neglected to mention in the previous episodes, Steven has a car now, and the car is the Dondai Supremo that his dad got in the original series. It's now officially Steven's and he drives it everywhere. That's all, so there, it's out of the way, whatever. Either way, Steven's a little annoyed by the pranks, but not really too upset. As such, after presumably packing the toilet paper away because, hey, free toilet paper, don't complain, Steven drives back to his house and finds that a welcome party is in full swing, and so he decides to go in and see who the new arrival is. And a little thing, but I like how when Steven goes inside, everyone that's attending the party are gems and humans. There's even one little thing in the background where we can see Ronaldo just chatting it up with one of the gems. That's, again, I don't like Ronaldo, but I kind of like that. I kind of like that little bit. Again, shows development. But either way, Steven soon meets who the guest of honor is, as the new gem who arrived is a tiny little fusion by the name of Bluebird Azurite, a short gem with a Cockney accent, dressed in a school uniform with 4 legs, who is more than happy to see Steven. And when it comes to her gemstones, they are a gem in place of her left eye and a single teardrop gem. Yeah, Bluebird is a fusion of Eyeball, Ruby, and Aquamarine, and Steven realizes it immediately, though Bluebird tries acting nice around Steven and even offers him food, giving him a mix of clamshells, peanut butter, and grass. Yeah, it's clear Bluebird was the one that was pranking Steven. And while Steven half-heartedly does take the quote-unquote food, the first chance he gets, he does pull Garnet, Amethyst, and Pearl into the bathroom so they can have a private chat. As such, once they run in there, with Greg also being there because he was taking the time to brush his hair, Steven lets them know that he thinks Bluebird is a fusion of Eyeball, Ruby, and Aquamarine. The gems say they already knew. Yeah, it's pretty friggin' obvious. You'd have to be blind and stupid not to realize who Bluebird really is. But the thing is, the gems are giving her a chance. After all, Steven's whole policy is give everyone a second chance, and the whole thing with Little Homeschool and reforming the Gem Empire was literally just, give bad guys a second chance. Allow them to have the opportunity to better themselves. And yes, Aquamarine and Eyeball Ruby aren't exactly big fans of Steven when we first met, as Aquamarine was the one that kidnapped Steven, and Eyeball Ruby tried to stab Steven and even turned on him in his trial. So yeah, I can understand. So it's understandable why Steven be a little hesitant, but the gems do talk Steven into potentially giving her a shot. And while Greg does tell Steven that they would understand if Steven doesn't want Bluebird around, Steven does decide to take his own words to heart and give Bluebird a shot, despite the fact that she still keeps pranking him. And from there, it does actually look like Bluebird is putting her best foot forward. She made a cake for Steven, which she and Pearl are cutting. She's helping Garnet with her stretches. She compliments Amethyst on her art, and she even starts hanging out with Greg and watching scary movies. And each of these situations, what I love is that each of these situations is framed to make it look like that Bluebird is going to cause harm to the gems or setting up more pranks, but ultimately it's literally just Steven misinterpreting it, and intentionally. Like the cake thing, she pulled a knife, so they pull a knife. Steven thinks it's dangerous, but in reality it's the cutter. The stretching, she thinks she has Garnet pinned, no, helping stretch. Steven sees Amethyst craptacular art, thinks it's a prank, and Amethyst gets sad when Steven insults it, and when he hears the horror movies, he thinks it's Bluebird hurting his dad. But again, throughout all this, Steven's suspicions do go down less and less, until finally he's like, you know what, maybe Bluebird is on the up and up. Maybe she is trying to turn over a new leaf. So he decides to just roll with it. And so it all seems good. From there, the episode cuts to the next morning as Steven wakes up, and we see Bluebird drew on his face while he was asleep, but as Steven's washing it off, he hears the warp activated, and he hears a van veering in his living room. When he goes to check, he sees that his dad's van is there, though his dad seems to be absent. until he hears screaming outside, and at first he thinks it's his dad and Bluebird watching more scary movies, until Greg yells for Steven's help. As such, Steven runs outside to see what the hoo-ha is, and sure enough, yeah, Steven was right the first time. Bluebird's nuts, as we see her holding Greg up by his hair above the house and pretty much making it clear that she means to do him harm. And when Steven trying to find a reasonable explanation for this, well, no, Bluebird just outright admits she's here to fuck Steven's shit up. And the whole reason why Aquamarine and Eyeball Ruby put on the charade was because they thought that this would allow them to get close to Steven, which they were kind of right about, though they also believe that everyone was fooled by this, as once Bluebird unfuses back into Aquamarine and Eyeball Ruby, they act like it's some big reveal, but when Steven lets them know that everybody knew who was them from the start, they're like, then why was everyone being nice to us? And Steven's like, because they're nice people. But whatever, but ultimately it doesn't matter. The thing is, the charade worked enough, so they are able to still try and so they were able to still get what they wanted. In this case, they got close to Steven because they wanted to learn more about his life and figure out the best way to hurt him. And so that's why they have Greg right here, as Aquamarine once again picks up Greg by his hair, and they pretty much just hold him hostage, telling Steven that they won't hurt his dad, but they'll only let him go if he does favors for them, specifically destroy his house, bubble his friends, and destroy Little Homeworld. Steven, of course, is not willing to do any of that shit, so, well, they decide they're just gonna shank Greg, with Eyeball Ruby pulling out her knife and getting ready to do the deed. However, Greg manages to struggle enough and manages to get the knife out of Eyeball Ruby's hand, and to get himself out of the pair of gems' grasp, he just cuts his hair, which, yeah, that shakes him up something fierce, because even while Greg lost most of the hair, all the hair on top of his head, he at least still had his long, flowing locks, and now it just goes down to his shoulder. Now it just barely goes down to his shoulder. So, yeah, he's not exactly happy by this, which, as a result, once Aquamarine throws Greg's hair away, and Greg is mourning this loss, yeah, Steven gets right pissed, and he tells his dad to just go inside the house. And so Greg does, and yeah, this is enough to piss Steven off that he goes pink and launches an attack right at Aquamarine and Eyeball. And so they end up getting knocked out of his house, and basically Steven takes the fight to the beach, and Aquamarine and Eyeball decide they need to fuse back into Bluebird in order to stand a chance. But every time they try, they fail, to the point where they start getting more and more frustrated with each other, to the point where they actually start fighting. As such, however, when they do this, Steven starts calming down, allowing the pink power to fade away. And so Steven just kind of starts smiling as he sees them bickering, and then asks if the only reason they fused was just to get back at Steven, which they confirm. And Steven tries saying, well, why don't you try? It's like, that's your problem. No wonder you couldn't keep the fusion up. You bonded to try and tear me down, but if you fuse together to support one another, you could do anything. There's many reasons to love, to fuse. It's to support, to hold on, to bring someone up, to love. If you open yourself up to this, and yeah, Steven's going into a schmaltzy speech, and what I love is that halfway through the speech, Aquamarine and Eyeball just groan. It's actually really funny, and they're even like, oh my god, he's so annoying, I hate him so much. And the instant that both say that, they're like, no way, me too! And that's enough to get them to fuse again. I kind of love that. It annoys Steven. But yeah, the fusion is successful and they go back to being Bluebird, who immediately showcases that she is actually an adept fighter, as she summons her own weapon, in this case, a fucking sword. That's awesome. And she immediately starts shooting energy blasts at Steven, which end up coalescing into other ice swords that almost nearly skewer him. As such, Steven tries putting up a good defense against Bluebird, but she is more adept and more aerial. But thankfully, halfway through the fight, that's when the crystal gems come out, wondering what the hoo-ha is themselves, and once they see Bluebird going nuts on Steven, yeah, all bets are off, as while Bluebird tries playing innocent, Garnet, Amethyst, and Pearl fuse into Alexandrite and then smushed her into the beach sand. As such, all 5 gems are fused back into their base forms. Well, most of them. Garnet's still Garnet. But ultimately, yeah, while Aquamarine and Eyeball pretend to be remorseful, or at least Aquamarine is, they make it clear. Ultimately, it's just a psych move, and they make it clear that they'll still hate Steven forever, and they'll one day be back to get their revenge, and blah, blah, blah. And so, yeah, Aquamarine takes Eyeball Ruby, and they fly away into the sky. As such, the episode ends with Steven going to his dad and apologizing for giving Bluebird a shot, but Greg says that it's not a problem. After all, if Steven wasn't wrong for wanting to giving Bluebird a second chance, it's just that not all people really want to change, which, again, I like that that's re-emphasized. And ultimately, yeah, And ultimately, yeah, you can help anybody. Ultimately, yeah, it reaffirms the message of you can help it. There's nothing wrong with helping people, but not all people want help. Not all people can be helped. So again, it's a nice. So again, kind of like that reaffirmation. And so the episode ends with Greg giving his hair a quote unquote funeral as he puts into the ocean and lets it wash away out into the distance. So there you go. But then this also brings us to a very special episode. This episode is weird. So here's the premise for a very special episode. Steven has overbooked his schedule. At the same time that he promised to help Pearl babysit Onion, he also promised Garnet to help with a safety Geminar, so to speak, wherein they would be lecturing a few gems on how to do basic human safety. Of course, Steven working with these gems alone is not enough to, get the thing done. And so for both of these appointments, Steven fuses with the gem he's working with. Specifically, so like when he's working with Pearl, he fuses into Rainbow 2.0, and when he's with Garnet, he fuses into Sunstone. And ultimately, the entire episode is about Steven just kind of juggling these student responsibilities and having to run from one location to the other as the stress little by little gets to him because when it's fused, the fusion is actually very adept at the job that Steven promised to do. But when Steven leaves the gem he partnered with alone with whatever task they were supposed to do, they suck at it. Case in point, Rainbow 2.0 is great at taking care of Onion, and Onion loves spending time with him. But when it's just Onion and Pearl, Pearl has no idea how to deal with this kid and is slowly but surely losing control and her sanity. And in the meantime, while Sunstone is able to do a successful safety Geminar with the gems present, in this case a Quartz Soldier, the Heaven and Earth Beetles, and Nephrites, ultimately her form of a safety ultimately Garnet's form. When it comes to Garnet, she can't do safety to save her life, as she has no tact and only lists all the possible ways things can go wrong and everything can go to hell in a handbasket, with one example being how the Heaven and Earth Beetle would fall into the garbage disposal and no one would realize about them until it was too late. Put simply, Steven is just rushing back and forth to maintain control, and it's stretching him so thin that he eventually decides to just take Onion from his home and bring him to the safety Geminar. Something that Garnet even thinks isn't a good idea, but Steven says it's fine, it'll all work out. Spoilers, it doesn't. It does not work out. Onion takes a blade of grass and begins blowing music with it, which entices the gems attending the Geminar, and so he leads them away Pied Piper style all through Beach City until they reach a cliff. He throws the blade of grass off it, and the gems jump off the cliff to get it. And when Steven is being pulled between Pearl and Garnet over who he should fuse with to save them, ultimately it all goes to hell as the gems land on the bottom of the cliff and Steven just falls over, lamenting that he shouldn't have overbooked his schedule. Only to learn the entire episode was a PSA hosted by Sunstone, who basically was just showcasing that yes, it's good to help people, but maybe it's okay to also say no if you feel like if you're stretching yourself too thin. And the episode ends with Sunstone pretty much saying, "Don't be a Steven while skydiving." I hope her parachute fails. But anyway, yeah, that was that episode. So, my thoughts on them both. First, let's talk about Bluebird. I again like Bluebird. It's more follow-up on what we got in Steven Universe. And again, it re-emphasizes the message that we typically see whenever Steven encounters Jasper. Namely, that while it is nice to help people and want to try and help them better themselves and change for the better, not all people want to change, and Aquamarine and Eyeball Ruby are prime examples of that. The reason why both of them hate Steven as much as they do is because back in Era 2, when the Crystal Gems were considered rebels and enemies of the Gem Empire, Steven was a primo target because everyone believed he was Rose Quartz, and Aquamarine and Eyeball Ruby both essentially had him in their crosshairs. Aquamarine was the one that brought Rose quartz in when Steven surrendered himself to save his friends when Aquamarine and Topaz were gathering humans. And then likewise, Eyeball Ruby actually had Steven in her sights and almost killed him. And at the trial, she confirmed that she did this, and that Steven had to chuck her into space. Essentially, for both Aquamarine and Eyeball Ruby, Steven's capture pretty much elevated them both, gave them primo attention. Everyone loved them. But then come Era 3, when it was revealed that Rose Quartz was actually Pink Diamond, which means Steven is technically the son of a diamond. And then of course, cut to the diamonds themselves wanting to try and turn over a new leaf and actually become better people for the sake of getting close to this kid. Suddenly, the accomplishments that Eyeball Ruby and Aquamarine are praised for don't look as good as they did before. And so while they were originally held up high, they now are just left to fall on themselves. So while Era 3 is good for most gems, for these two specific gems, they still have very much a lot of reasons to hate this kid. And so it is kind of cool to see them follow up on that and actually kind of work together on that. Again, going back to Bluebird as a fusion, I like Bluebird. I do like her as a fusion. It's a very creative idea, and I like that unlike the Malachite fusion between Jasper and Lapis, the Bluebird fusion is actually more stable. Like with Malachite, the fusion was formed from hate. But whereas the Malachite fusion was only really held together because Lapis wanted to contain Jasper / Jasper wanted the extra power boost from being a fusion. In the case of Bluebird, what binds Bluebird together is that both halves of her just hate Steven that much. And while ultimately in a normal situation Aquamarine and Eyeball Ruby would never see eye to eye, when it comes to their hatred of Steven, they find common ground. And that common ground is enough for them to actually be in sync with one another and coordinate. Because at the end of the day, even if they get on each other's nerves, they can both agree on one thing. They hate this kid and they want his ass to be grass. So they will do whatever it takes to do that, even if it means working with another gem. Hence, Bluebird Azurite, which I'll give credit where it's due. I like the angle they take with Bluebird throughout the episode, as it really does have the same grounding of having essentially a fake out reveal. Like we see through as Steven's paranoia, I do believe, is justified. As after all, considering the gems that make up Bluebird, of course he would be paranoid. These gems terrorized him during Era 2 when they thought he was Rose Quartz. And so, to see them return again, it makes sense why Steven would be as paranoid as he is. But by that same token, the gems are not wrong in telling Steven that maybe he should still give them a shot. After all, Steven is all about forgiveness and trying to turn over a new leaf. And we've seen him do that with other gems. Hell, the B team of the Crystal Gems are made up entirely of gems who have tried to kill Steven at one point or another. Lapis Lazuli stole Earth's oceans and was actively antagonistic towards the Crystal Gems until Steven helped her. Peridot worked dutifully for Yellow Diamond and actively tried to kill the Crystal Gems until she started getting to know them. And Bismuth had a personal vendetta with Rose, considering what Rose put her through. And when Steven and her disagreed for the same reason why Bismuth was locked away, she transferred the hatred to Steven briefly until she got her head out of her own ass and realized, okay, I probably should not hate this kid. My point is this: Steven has definitely put his best foot forward to help gems recover and turn over a new leaf and actually become better people. So it makes sense. So ultimately, while Steven is still hesitant to trust Bluebird, he at least realizes the gems make a good point and that he should still give her another shot. And the lesson in the episode, I think, does actually hold strong, considering that, it's affirmed that Steven wasn't wrong for giving Bluebird that shot. Yes, he was paranoid a little, but again, throughout the episode, all these things that looked threatening turned out to be rather harmless. And so Steven, a little bit at a time, was letting his guard down until finally, by the time he caught Bluebird watching scary movies with his dad, he was like, you know what, maybe you are good people. I'll let this all slide. Which I kind of like. I do actually like that. It's just ultimately Steven's first instinct was right. Bluebird could not be trusted. And so, while it wasn't wrong of Steven to want to put trust in Bluebird, sadly, Bluebird just wasn't deserving of that trust. She was very much a two-faced bitch who only used her position as, well, Bluebird Azurite to get close to Steven and his friends so she could learn any potential secrets that could be used against them. In this case, learning about Steven's connection with Greg and how they could use that to ultimately hurt Steven. So, again, I like that. It's a good one. It's good, and I like how we see Bluebird throughout the episode, because I openly admit, as a troll, she's a good one. I like that throughout the, it's clear that she definitely wants to screw with Steven at every possible turn. As, yes, while she's trying to put on a nice front, as we'll call it, you can still feel a bit of the malice that Eyeball and Aquamarine have for Steven in her actions. They ultimately, the pranks they have are very tame, and they don't really do a lot, but you can tell that she's trying to get under Steven's skin. Hell, a subtle example, which was ultimately pointed out to me via YouTube comment section, was the food that she prepared for Steven. The grass, the oysters, and the peanut butter. All three of these things can cause allergies in humans, so it was very clear that Bluebird was trying to quote-unquote poison Steven with those foods. So yeah, it's clear Bluebird had it out for Steven even when she was acting nice. It's just that she channeled that hatred into trying to mess with him rather than causing any direct harm. So, again, I kind of like that. And I still love the unreveal of Bluebird revealed to be Eyeball, Ruby, and Aquamarine. I just love it. Like, she gives this big speech about how Eyeball and Aquamarine were celebrated for the victories, but then shunned when Steven tricked all the other gems into liking him. How those two gems came back for their revenge, and those gems are Aquamarine and Eyeball Ruby, and they're just waiting for Steven to be shocked, and then when Steven says, no, I knew it was you the whole time. I love it. It's funny. And ultimately, I love it. And they're shocked at first, but they just eventually roll with it. It's like, whatever, we got what we wanted anyway, so it's good. I like it, and at the very least, it is actually cool, and at the very least, when Aquamarine does get serious about hurting Steven, I'll admit, she puts up a good fight. I dig it. So again, on the whole, not a great episode, but a very entertaining one. I like how it does kind of play with expectations while also, in a way, going the way you would expect. It's fun. It's kind of fun, a little silly, but definitely has a good lesson to it with, putting your trust in people. It's not wrong to want to help others, but that doesn't mean that they're always worthy. But that doesn't mean that those people always want your help. So again, entertaining stuff. Nothing too big, but entertaining. As for a very special episode, this episode is balls to the walls insane, and I kind of enjoy it for that. For starters, I like that the episode does give more attention to the fusions that we saw in the final episode of Steven Universe. While I always enjoy seeing the new fusions in the show, a detriment to having Steven fusing with Garnet and Pearl in the very last episode of Steven Universe meant that ultimately those fusions were never going to be seen again. The thing is, when Steven first fused with Amethyst, it was like near the end of season 3. So that would still give us plenty more times to see Steven and Amethyst working together and form Smoky Quartz. And yeah, while they didn't form Smoky a lot, they did still form her a few more times throughout the course of the series, giving her more time and allowing her to kind of have breathing room to expand her character and show what she was like as a person. But in the case of Rainbow 2.0 and Sunstone, because they were only showcased in the last episode, well, we only really got really quick glimpses of their characters, so we really didn't get a chance to know them. Or at the very least, not a chance to know Ruby. I hate Sunstone. Sunstone can go rotten up for all I care. But ultimately, at the very least, it was still cool to see them showcased in one episode. And so again, that's good stuff. But the real thing that made the episode work, in my opinion, seeing everything going to hell. That is what I loved about the episode. Seeing everything go wrong with Pearl and Garnet as Steven had to abandon one for the other, and seeing the situations on both ends slowly but surely devolve. I loved seeing Pearl as she slowly was losing patience with Onion and going nuts. I loved how Garnet had no sense of tact when talking with the gems and talking about how the possible ways things could could go wrong. I loved seeing Pearl freaking out as she begged Steven for help because she had no idea what to do with Onion. I loved how Garnet was scaring the other gems to the point where they were actively afraid to be around her. And the ending, when seeing Steven just kind of hitting his last nerve, it's oddly enough hilarious in a weird Schadenfreude kind of way. So I kind of like it. And when you learn by the end of the episode that the whole situation was just a TV PSA set up by Sunstone, in a strange, bizarre way, it makes everything that much more hilarious. Because it means they had to go over the top on purpose to show you the worst possible scenario for overbooking yourself. And I kind of love it for that. I do. I really do. I'm not Sunstone, though. I hate Sunstone. Sunstone can get hit by a truck for all I care. But, again, the episode itself, it's beautiful. It's insane, it's stupid, and when I first watched the episode, the exact words I thought to myself were, the fuck did I just watch? And I love it for it. I love it for that. It does not mean I suddenly like Sunstone. No. I still hate Sunstone based on everything that she represents. And every single time she opens her mouth and gives a safety seminar, out of spite, I want to do the exact opposite and do it in the most extreme and dangerous way possible. But again, my irrational hatred of Sunstone aside, a very special episode is an enjoyable and fun, over-the-top, insane, stupid, and just overall funny episode that... it's definitely one you gotta watch just to see for yourself. It's a glorious example of seeing everything going off the rails, and I can't recommend it anymore. So, yeah, on the whole, Bluebird, an enjoyable episode with some fun, with some nice banter, some nice stuff with Bluebird, some good antics, a nice reveal, a good and entertaining villains that follows up on more stuff from Steven Universe, and ultimately an honestly good moral, which I've talked about before, but I at least like that they continue expanding on here. And then, of course, a very special episode, like I said, insane, stupid, over the top, but just perfect in its own glorious insanity. So, yeah, I think that's really all I have to say. I thank you for watching. I'm Samuel Johnson, and I hope to see you next week as, well, guess what? We get to talk about my favorite episode of both Steven Universe Future and potentially all of Steven Universe itself. So till then, I hope you have a good night, and take care.